Alrighty. All right, we are recording.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming tonight. We really do appreciate it. We hope you'll tell your friends. The more the merrier. That's how we're going to be able to learn from each other in these things, and we hope you'll come back for many more of them. I do want to mention again, if you will go on the chat function here and send Dylan your email address. He can add it to the emails because we are going to be sending out emails to everybody with the links as kind of a courtesy. And if you come once, then you'll get all the links in the future, and we hope that'll be beneficial to you. Our featured modeler tonight is Robert Simmons. I met Robert a little while ago, and I was really impressed with the presentation that I saw him make that night and with his modeling. Robert is an N-scaler, and I think you're really going to be amazed at some of his modeling. And with that said, Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Dylan, if you can walk me through this, how we get this up.
Oh, sorry. You see on the bottom of the screen where the video is, if you roll your mouse over it, you should see a black bar that shows up, and in the middle of that is a green button that says screen share.
All right. Click on that?
Yep, click on that. It should give you a list of screens to pick from.
Okay.
And then you just got to pick the one for the PowerPoint.
Okay. So presentation 1, PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay, and then I hit share.
Yep, that should do it.
Okay.
All right, we are online.
So then I should be able to go to slideshow.
Yep.
And from the beginning.
You got it.
Okay, can you see my cursor move?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll get started then. The Western Kansas Rails came about because I'd been in N-track for probably 20 years in a club layout. And there were a lot of things that I loved about N-track, mostly getting model railroading out of the basement and into malls and other train show type environments. But there were also things that I didn't particularly care for about it. And so there came a point in time where as I was getting older and my back was getting worse, my knees were getting worse, this N-track layout was small. It was 18 by 22, I think, and it was quite heavy. There were 26 modules, and we had to laser level everything. It took a long time for it to get set up. So I wanted to build things lighter, stronger, and do things a little bit better. And I wanted to model something that was different that most people don't model. Usually people model what they see around them. So I took that same tack, and I live in Western Kansas in Dodge City. So this is Western Kansas Rails. It is a sectional layout. It's not modular. You can't move the pieces around. It always has to go together the same way. And I stole a lot of the practices of the Sipping and Switching Society of North Carolina, which is an HO scale club. But then I had to modify some of the things they did to make it work for N scale. So, okay, there's a picture of the layout set up at the big train show, at Rocky Mountain Train Show in Denver. That's at the Denver Mart, and off to the right, you can see the front door. They put the layout, actually that's the second door. But they put our layout right there as a crowd attraction. That's the banner that you see behind me. We have it up on stilts over the yards. And basically, I wanted a layout that was more operations oriented as opposed to just running trains around in a circle. I wanted to avoid the 3-track racetrack look that N-track oftentimes has. And one of the big bugaboos with N-track was they insist on a lower track height. And that made it, you couldn't really duck under it. You had to get on your hands and knees and crawl under it, or you had to build a lift bridge. The other thing about N-track, because it is modular and so many people come in from different places, you have a snowy ski resort scene right next to a desert scene. And I wanted the scenery to blend all the way around the layout. So basically on this layout, since this is the last traveling layout that I'm going to build, I wanted to push my skills on every aspect. So we went to all code 55 track from microengineering. We scratch built all the track switches, and all the structures are either scratch built or kitbashed. And then I wanted it to have a kind of a realistic feeling to it. So all of the industries have real business names. There's nothing made up like Bob's Biscuits or something like that. And I also wanted to bring a level of detail that you see on people's home layouts to a traveling layout so that the crowd can see what can be done. Now, this is monocoque construction. So there is no, unlike the end track where you had like a 2x4 frame with a piece of plywood over the top, there is no frame on these. This is actually module number 1 turned upside down during its initial construction. Everything is made out of 1/4-inch Luan plywood and wood glue and some stiffeners. Now you can see on the bottom edge here and at the top edge, there are 3/4-inch joining plates where the 2 sections go together. And number 1 and number 14 are unique because over on this side, there's another additional section of 3/4-inch because off to the right, we have, that's where the yards join the main layout. But basically this is, it's a little time consuming. You take your top sheet, lay it upside down, you have your pieces pre-cut, and you have to put them in place with wood glue, clamp them and walk away till the glue dries, then come back. Now the last few modules I was able to speed the process up a bit because I reverted to my air stapler. So instead of having to clamp it and walk away from it, you could staple the pieces in place and that would act like it was holding it. The monocoque construction is both light and strong. These sections are 30 inches wide by 6 foot long and weigh no more than a 2x4 end track module. Then I raised the layout height from 40 inches from the top of the rails to the floor to 45 inches. Now I'm a shorter guy, so I can just duck under that. I don't have to get on my hands and knees and crawl. This layout is 18 feet by 24 feet when it's all set up. And I decided to take digital photo backdrops. So all of the photographic backdrops you see are from Western Kansas. Any questions so far? Go to the next one. Now, one of the big things about N-Track and why it was so time consuming is because of the way they have their specifications, the tracks don't go right up to the edges. They stop 2.5 inches away from the edge, and then you have to put a 5-inch track piece all the way across. And so that meant in order to have a smooth running layout, when we would take this smaller N-Track layout, we had to laser level each section as we put it in, which took any number of hours to do that. And then you had to go and put in all the track sessions and hook up all the wiring and whatnot. So by having this setup, we went from a 6-hour setup to about 1 hour. When I went to Wichita with it in roughly this shape, which was several years ago, I had 2 guys helping me and we were up and ready to run trains in 1 hour and 10 minutes. So what we're doing here, the Sipping and Switching Society, because they're HO, you've got stronger track, they use 2 brass flathead countersunk screws driven into the wood, and then the rails like this are soldered to the top of the screws. And in this case, I wanted something a little stronger because N-scale rail is a lot more diminutive. So I use 1-inch long steel screws through 1/4 inch wide brass sheet. And so the rails are soldered to the screw and the brass seat so that there's no way that the screw can back out and cause any alignment problems. So that gives me a nice strong joint. I don't have to worry about heat or cool contractions because that part of the track is always there at the same spot. Questions?
I think that's great.
What level keeps all that level? Then do you have rail joiners?
Doesn't need to be level. Doesn't need to be level. Basically, the sections, what the Sipping and Switching Society, and I had one of their members was transferred out to work his job in Dodge City, and he came to our club and was teaching us all this. They made a steel template that had 4 holes that everybody drilled their holes at the same point, and then 2 of the 4 holes had locating pins that would go into the other modules. So all the holes had a pin in it. And they also had cutouts at the top where the rails were supposed to meet, because their club is modular. They can swap their modules around. So mine's sectional. I didn't have to worry about where the tracks were going to be, but I still use their template to drill the holes. And then they're basically 3/4 inch holes, and they use a thin-walled steel pipe that I just couldn't find in Western Kansas. So I fell back on 3/4 inch wooden dowel. And when you get the dowel in there, you basically taper the ends, because you only need the base where it's up against the plate where it's actually a fit finish. Otherwise, you have to play hell trying to get it taken apart again once you get it put together. But no matter what the floor is doing, the layout is strong enough and rigid enough. As long as you've got it put together and clamped, it'll hold itself up.
So then there's no rail joiners connecting the two together.
No rail joiners anywhere.
So you're just relying on the bottom wires to connect all the modules together?
Correct. Electrically, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's just like N-Track. There's a main bus that travels all the way around. It hooks up to the power cart. And now what I do is kind of follow what we did on the N-Track, where about every 2 foot, I have power drops going down to the main bus. So I have very little power loss.
How do your tracks connect between the modules or between your different pieces?
Well, that's what I had on the last page. That's where they were butted together.
And that's all you do? You just butt them together?
All you do. Well, the nice thing that I had in this instance is, since I built it all, I was able to go module by module. So I already had one module done, and then I just made the second track mate where the first one was. So
Gotcha.
This type of system, I don't know if it would be a nationwide system, because like an N scale, if you're a couple of thousandths off, you're causing all kinds of problems. That's one reason why N-Track does the 5-inch piece, because if one guy has his track misaligned, the 5-inch piece will give you a lot of variance there.
I see.
So the WKR, I wanted to have the ability, instead of just standing there watching the crowd and watching 3 different trains run around in a circle, I wanted to have some capabilities of operations. So this is looking at the yard after it was basically just completed. And I have 2 yards. It's all that. Now, I stole this design from a club down in Tulsa, where they actually came to a one single track down the center with a turnaround. So they literally had a Y, but because of the traveling layout, I didn't want to have the electrical issues of having a turnaround loop on one track. So I just split it into 2 separate tracks. But for operations, one train basically takes up 2 of the tracks in each yard. So I can literally set up 2 trains on each yard. So one pair come out and operate, the other trains are still in the yard ready to go. So literally, as soon as one train crew is finished, another one can pull out and continue the operations. Now the outer 2 tracks basically are just DC powered. They're for the kids. Trains run around the circle, but that keeps something going all the time. And then I've got the operation set up. Now I've got the yard in the center. Each of the long sidings, or each of the long sides of the layout, have long passing sidings, and the track here at the very bottom, this actually bypasses the yards. So this can actually be used as a 3rd passing siding. And we've got 9 industries that we serve during each session. And the 3rd track, this inner yard track here, we've got is all controlled with DCC Digitrax with radio throttles. Questions? Okay, now the overall look, I wanted to get away from the 3 tracks right next together all the time. So the outer, whoops, oh, I moved my cursor, okay. The outer track over here is the red line. And usually what I do is I put a high-speed train on it, because that basically just runs in a circle. And so I'll put Amtrak or some passenger train out there. And then the green track over here on the inside, now this is the green main, and then you've got the green passing siding here, as well as your industry sidings. This is all during the construction phase of it. This is DCC, and this is where the operations can take place. Or if I'm by myself at a train show, I can just put a third train on there and let it orbit. Now the blue track, because of the wide gap between the two, I can let this meander back and forth between the two tracks, so you don't get that just 3 straight track load. And then this is a picture of the legs. We used banquet table legs, which obviously would be quite short. And then, so what we wanted to do to get it up to 45 inches is I took a pair of legs to Home Depot and found, I think it's 1 inch diameter, outer diameter pipe, just snugly fits right over the metal leg. And you just cut it to length. And I used 3 screws, 2 on one side and 1 on the other side. And then you just put end caps on the bottom. And then they fold up, because it's 6 foot away, they fold up and there's no interference there. So then one of the things I wanted to accomplish with the scenery was to have a blending all the way around the layout. So the modules 14 and 1 on one end of the layout are basically a city scene. Then I've got a transition module here, and the corners are kind of transitional. This is where you're transitioning from city more to county, and then farther down you transfer from county to rural, and then back to county, and then back to the city. So it blends all the way around, hopefully. And you can see some of the digital backdrops that I used there. And then one of the things that I wanted to push myself on was in getting away from the Atlas Code 80 Flex Tracks. I used it for probably 20 years. It's great stuff, and it's very easy to work with, but I wanted to get a better look to it. So the Microengineering Code Flex Track is a lot harder to work with, but the results look a lot better. So what I ended up doing on this layout was I marked the center lines of the main lines of where I wanted them to go. And then I cut 3/4 inch plywood into a rough shape that would be HO scale cork width. And that was laid down on the main lines. And then I put N scale cork on top of that to try to get the double profile. This ballast is so fine that I really kind of lost the double profile because it just filled in the gap. But I got a really nice, the rail now is like 3/4 of an inch above the deck of the layout. So I was then able to use 3/4 inch extruded foam to fill in the gaps, which made it very easy to cut my drainage ditches and any other features that I wanted to cut out of the ground area. Usually with model railroading, we see a lot of people going up with mountains or hills or things, but very rarely do you see people going down. And so that's one of the things I was able to accomplish here.
Robert, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are you using foam as your base material?
Well, for the scenery, but not for the track. The track has 3/4 inch plywood underneath it. So basically I took a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and cut it into strips with a table saw. And then to go around the corners, I had to cut those strips into 1 inch pieces. And then you just kind of glue them down on top of the plywood. Then I would belt sand it to get it all smooth. And like when you go around the corners, you're going to have gaps on the outside. I just use spackling to fill in there and then lightly sand that.
But you put the base material of foam on top of the Lawan?
Well, the foam is basically under the scenery. So what I would have to do after the main tracks were down, I used typing paper to make a template of the area that I wanted to cover. And then I just transferred that to the foam, cut it out, shape it, and put it in place.
Oh, okay. So the 3/4 inch road bed is right on the Lawan.
Correct.
And you filled in around it.
Now, like you can see here, this is on this picture, this is a start. The yard is all on the foam. I didn't put the 3/4 inch underneath it.
Right.
But all the main lines have the 3/4 inch plywood underneath as a solid base. So one of the things I have refused to do for model railroading is to call these things turnouts. No real railroader says, I'm going to go throw that turnout. So I call these switches, and I have been scratch building switches since 1995. I counted them up some time ago. I'm probably well over the 100 mark, both HO and N scale. But on this layout, I went, all the switches are scratch built. And this is the throat to the yard. So the main line is over here to the right of this. You've got a number 8 coming off the main. And then I was able to really shorten the yard throat by starting with a Y going into a left and right track. So one of the best things I ever bought was that Micromart mini table saw. And I can take the printed circuit board, and once you get your width set, you can just cut strips of that like crazy. Then you just cut them to the length that you need for the individual ties. And I use the Fast Tracks paper templates, because if you go out and buy their jigs, that's great. But like if you buy a number 8, you can only build number 8s, and you can't build curves and you can't build Ys. And with paper, you can build anything you want. So in this case, what I've also learned to do is I had been taking the ties off the microengineering track and sliding them underneath to fill the gaps. But that was time consuming because they don't go all the way across, and you have to cut another tie to fit. And so what I discovered is I believe it was 40 thousandths sheet styrene is the same height as the plastic ties. So I was, again, just able to cut those into strip and then just use an X-Acto knife to cut them to the proper length and just slide them underneath. And then once it's painted and ballasted, you'd never know that they were sheet styrene. Questions? God, I must be good at this.
Do you actually glue to the styrene ties, or are they just there to for looks, like most wood ties are?
The styrene tie is glued to the foam, just to hold it in place. It is not glued to the rails.
Okay.
The printed circuit board takes care of that.
That's what I figured. Thank you.
How many plastic ties?
I use a lot more printed circuit ties than Fast Tracks recommends. I'm like twice as many ties because I built mine to be bullet.
Engage.
Pardon me?
Keeps it engaged.
Yes.
Much easier. I've hand built a few HO scale using paper templates as well.
I actually enjoy. What I did with the paper templates is I cut the template out and masking taped it to a little piece of masonite that I could pick up and move around. And then I cut my PC ties and wood glue them to the paper. Then once that's dry, you can come in with a little metal file and take care of any burrs that are on there. You can solder everything in place, nothing shifts. And then when you're done with building the switch, you just put it in the sink, let the water dilute the glue, and you can just pull the paper off. So that works quite well for that.
How many plastic ties between the two that you've soldered?
Well, you're going to fill all the gaps. So you're going to have, like at the very bottom down here, this would be one tie versus the head blocks. Now you'd have another set of ties here, probably 4 here, another one in between. So you have a bunch, but the Fast Tracks paper template shows that to you. So you can tell how many you're going to need. Any other questions? Okay, one of the things I wanted to do with the Western Kansas rails, I didn't want visitors to come look at my layout and see the same buildings that everybody else has. I've traveled a lot and I've seen a bunch of layouts in different cities, and they may paint them different colors and sometimes kitbash them, but it's the same Walthers kit buildings that everybody has on their layouts. So I wanted also to have an iconic structure that people can recognize immediately as being from Western Kansas. So this grain elevator was something that I went to is here in Dodge City. That's the Pride Ag Co-op elevator. It's the largest of 4 elevators actually in Dodge City. But I went and visited with the manager. He gave me the exact heights and diameters of everything. This is a true N-scale grain elevator in compared to the train. Now, one of the things you learn I'm a city kid. I grew up in St. Louis. The closest thing I want to get to a cow is wrapped in cellophane in a supermarket. But I have learned from people out here that, a little bit about agribusiness. And what Walthers markets as their grain elevator kit is actually a grain mill. It is not an elevator. The silos are too short and you've got too many windows in the head house. But very few people have enough space in their layout to have a 6-foot long elevator like this. So my regional president once said, well, why don't you do an article on how to build that? And I said, well, who would build it? It won't fit on most people's layouts, which is exactly why Walthers built the kit they did. It would fit on anybody's layout. And if you wanted a bigger one, they have extra silos. But 128 foot tall is a standard silo. So you can see how that dwarfs the trains.
I have a question.
Pardon me?
On your silos there,
Yeah.
you say they're 128 feet tall. What's the diameter of each one of those silos?
24 foot.
24.
24
Thank
foot
you.
exterior diameter, 22 foot interior.
Very good. Thank you.
Did you use,
So, you know, just in case you were wondering, this is the head house over here, and these long windows building, this long low window up here is called the Texas house. And what that is that's where the belt feed is. So they bring grain up to the top, they run it along the belt, and then they drop it into whatever silo they want to drop in. And so if you're going to load out underneath the silos, it actually looks like a funnel where there's actually a belt system built into the ground underneath. So if a farmer wants to pull his wheat out, they would drop it down below, run it over, and then upload it into the semi-truck.
did you use PVC pipe for those silos?
PVC pipe. Actually, I was very lucky. I went to Home Depot with my measurements, and I believe it was 1 inch exterior diameter was almost exactly a scale 24 foot.
Hmm.
It was the difference wasn't worth mentioning. But that's all PVC pipe and sheet styrene. Now, one thing that I will, excuse me, say about, like, one thing I learned on scratch building with sheet styrene, or one technique I use, when you have this long structure with a whole bunch of windows in it, it's almost impossible to get all your windows cut square on an even plane with a nibbler. You'd have to be just extremely talented, far more than me. So what I discovered, an easier way to do it was I cut a long strip of styrene, the length of the structure, up to the bottom of the window. Then I cut a strip of styrene, the height of the window, which is then cut into the pieces that go between the windows, and then another structure or piece that would fit from the top of the windows to the roof. So then you just glue them all together on a flat plane, and you might have to use a little body putty to fill any imperfections, but that was a lot faster than trying to sit there with a nibbler and try to cut, because with a nibbler, you get one window off, you got to start all over again. Unless you have a way to fix that. So then this is another structure. This is more of a kitbash. Ever since I saw this in real life, I wanted to model it. I was driving in Kansas City, Missouri, and the General Mills grain, now this is a grain mill where they turn the wheat and other products into flour. This was actually only 1/3 of the structure. When you look at it from Google Earth, it's a big horseshoe-shaped structure. The other side is just as long as that. So this is obviously the incoming silos. Now they're shorter because this is only temporary storage. They just use it to keep the mill going all the time, that they don't run out of grain. And then this is the actual production. You can see there's a lot more windows in this section over here. And then this low structure is offices, and over here on the far left, I actually compressed this quite a bit. That's the truck loading dock. And it would actually be about another 2 or 3 feet longer than what I'm representing here. But the gray areas on the roof, I have no idea what those are, but that's the way it is from Google Earth. So I don't know if they had to patch the roof or what they had to do there. But again, I wanted to have structures that dominated the layout, the trains running through it. as opposed to the trains looking bigger than the buildings.
You could do that very, very well with N scale. I mean, the
Yes.
picture you had with the train running next to the grain elevator, that gives you a sense of scale.
Yes, it does. It does. So when my look at the choice of scale is one of perspective. So very rarely do we stand right next to the rail tracks and see the train. Usually, at least out here in Western Kansas, we see them from like a mile away, and they're basically small, running against the horizon. And so that's kind of almost the effect that I was trying to achieve here. So then one of the things I wanted to do was use real business names. In Garden City, of course, being in the Midwest, we're kind of behind the times a little bit. So it was just about 5 years ago that Walmart finally put in their neighborhood market, which I'm sure has been all over the country except out here. So what I did is I went to the building and I took actual measurements and took a bunch of photographs and had to really compress it for the size that I had there. But everybody knows Walmart. And so when you go, I think it adds to the realty of the layout if you're using real names that people will recognize. So then one of the things that I'm trying to do is bring a level of detailing to a traveling layout that you might only see on a home layout. So now this layout is only about 6 years old. We started January 15th of 2014 with a stack of plywood. So after 6 years, the basic construction is done. All the scenes have their structures except for one, my concrete plant I haven't started on yet. But one of the things that I can do over the next few years is go back and add layer after layer of more details. So like here's a photographic backdrop in the background. I added the stop sign. I've got all the road markings that are appropriate. We've got the HPE. This is a GHQ kit. Now HPE stands for High Plains Energy, which was actually a business here in Western Kansas. And of course, it's heading to the building over here, which is HPE. But you've got now these grade crossing arms here. These are all 3D printed. You've got an American flag. You've got in between the tracks, you can see the culverts just kind of sticking out a little bit. Now, this is unusual even for N scale, but the cars have license plates. Now, you can't read them, but the representation is there. So like if you've got a lot of cars on your layout, no matter what the scale is, make sure they have the proper license plates or stickers or whatever that you would normally see. And then I've scratch built the chain link fence over here in the corner. That is basically metallic ribbon that they use for gifts and whatnot, cut down to size and with steel poles. So that was the pictures that we've seen so far are basically the construction phase for the last 5 years. This is the way it looks today. This is module number 1. This is one of the 2 city scenes. So every now and then you get lucky. Over here, you've got this building, which was a 1995 Tyco Burger King. And I had that on probably 2 other layouts before this. And I was going to throw it away. And then I remembered in Garden City, there is a old Burger King, the original style building like that became a Bionic Burger, became something else. But now it is Tequila's Mexican Bar and Grill. So that is a digital photograph of their actual street sign. And those are the colors that they painted it. And so I have an accurate representation of something that's there. Now, I had no real intention of putting Pizza Hut and Domino's next to each other. But the Domino's building was small and fit in that space, so there you are. But now this is actually a digital photograph backdrop of Garden City. And then this is Teeter Irrigation. Out here in Western Kansas, they have a lot of irrigation dealers for the farmers. And although they don't get served by rail, I can make that my imagination. So the rail or the aluminum pipe for the irrigation system does come in banded with metal strap and 2x4s. So I have, now these loads are in, I can just pull them out. They're separate from the cars. And so you can see I've built racks for the storage for the different sizes of the piping. I've got a trash pile of the banding straps that came off. I've modified some tractors to be lifters where they would pull them off the cars and set them on the different things. I've actually got the road number and road sign on the side of the building. Now, in Western Kansas, wind power, of course, has become a big thing. This is actually a digital photograph backdrop of TP&L, which is a transloading operation. So you can just see a crane right here where they bring the cars in by rail. The train tracks curve around right here, and they will pick these the heads up and the bodies up and the blades up, set them on the ground, and then they put them on trucks to go where they need to go. So I'm representing that. I've got 5 windmills here. Now you can see there's just a little bit of a gap here of my cover because the motor units are underneath. So basically I cut a square hole in the foam so that it looks, you can't see the motor. These actually spin at scale speeds. And I do have a 6th one that is no longer working. So my plan is to actually slice off the blades and feather them like they would when they're out of service and just have it sit there quietly. But here you can see the end of the grain mill again with the truck loading platform that I have there. And then this area here is Agridyne. This is a business where they bring in molasses by tank car. They have tanks of chemicals and vitamins and minerals that this is for cattle feed. So they will mix all this stuff up together in the tanks, put them on tank trucks, and send them out to feed yards where they mix into dry feed, and then that's what they put into the feed bunks for the cattle at the feed yards. So you're learning more about cattle than you ever wanted to know in your life. So this is the other end of the mill. And so this is where I was trying to, most businesses are quite proud of their businesses. They like to decorate them and they like to have flowers and gardens and make them look nice for visitors. So I've also got the notice signs. I've got handicap parking. Most all of my businesses have handicap parking signs on it. I've got trash dumpsters. I've got scratch-built light poles. And you can see here and here where damage has occurred. Somebody knocked it with something. But one of the things that I had an opportunity, I always try to take a misfortune and turn it around. So back in 2016, I had back surgery and I was laid up for about a month with nothing I could do. So these cars, I bought probably 400 of them from a company in China. And they only come in like 6 body styles and only like 4 or 5 colors. There's like white, black, green, red, and white or something like that. So I spent that summer taking them apart, putting the body shells on little barbecue skewers, and then I was repainting them. I went to Hobby Lobby and got a bunch of car paints and repainted them, redetailed them, put license plates on them. And so now they look a little more realistic because you got a variety of colors instead of just the basic colors.
You know what you should do on that last image is where the light stanchion, where the light fell off, put it on the ground there on top of one of those cars with an insurance adjuster around it.
Yeah.
A tow truck.
Yeah. I can do that. Now, one of the things I've also done with these dumpsters, these are actually, I think, Digcom. It's paper. You print them out and bend them together and fold them up. But I was able to, on another scene, lift the lids, and I used the white plastic from Walmart shopping bag to make it look like trash bags that were overstuffed. The lid couldn't close. But one of the things you can see here on this parking lot is in Western Kansas, it's quite dry. We're considered part of the High Plains Desert. And so there's a lot of dust that blows around. you'll notice that where the cars travel, there's not a whole lot of dirt. But over here in the corners where nobody parks, I've added dusting to make it look like nobody's been there.
Now, guys, real quick before in case something happens, I've got a thunderstorm rolling in on my end, and I've had the power flicker twice already. Now, the computer's on a UPS, but just in case something happens, just so you guys don't go, oh my God, what happened?
Okay.
Rather give you all a heads up now.
Now this is the other side of the grain elevator. Excuse me. Now the modules are 6 foot long. This model is roughly 5.5 feet.
Oh,
But this gives you an idea what I was talking about with these long walls that have these windows. You can see all the windows are straight, they're square. And with N scale, you can get away with a lot of stuff because, like for instance, I don't need any window mullins in there because I took the clear plastic and used an ink pen, a ballpoint pen, and drew them in, which would be scale size for N scale. You wouldn't be able to see the window mullins from a distance. So then this is a scene right next to the grain elevator. This is a digital photograph of a real property in Western Kansas. I've got my Shell gas station. I added lighting on the parking lot. You've got trash dumpsters. This is over here is a fire station. And so I've got a little bit more of a garden and the American flag there, along with their trash dumpsters. And you've got your 2-lane road with proper road markings.
How did you get your flag to have such a good drape to it?
That is, I think Woodland Scenics.
It's molded that way then.
It's molded that way.
I see.
That one is. You can also, I've got some paper ones that I printed out, and you can kind of crunch them up a little bit and drape them a bit. Now the interesting part of this is this is called American Implement. As you can see in the sign over here, this is actually their sign. This is actually their Just Ask's rental sign. And what I've done is I took a relatively standard building and turned it into their maintenance shed, but I added the steel and concrete poles here, protectors for the building. Now, the interesting part of all this equipment over here is that in N scale, you can't find it. So if, like there is a website called 3000toys.com, and I first went there and I put in N scale farm equipment, came up 0. Tried N scale construction equipment, came up 0. And then I remembered that over at Tractor Supply, they have a little basin where you can buy these key rings that have a tractor as a fob.
Oh,
And so I went to 3000 Toys and put in key rings and came up with 6 pages. So almost all of these are key rings, even this one. Even the harvesters are key rings. Okay. And I think that's liability. If you sell it as a toy, then a kid chokes on it, you're liable. But as a key fob, hey, what are you doing giving your kid your keys? But even some of the construction, this piece is a key ring, and this is a key ring. So you just sometimes have to be creative of where you get stuff.
Oh, congratulations. Well done.
yeah.
Now, this is the edge of a feed yard. And I don't know why this blurred in my photograph, but you can see some of the silos where they hold the liquid feed or cattle feed mixture. And then the cow, let's see, I can go back. Yeah, you can just see some of the cows over here. They were in the corral. The problem was they were way over there and they would have been perfect. But by the time I got my tripod and camera set up, they decided to come over and see what I was doing. So now they look like the cows that ate Chicago. So this is Robinson Oil Company. This is a wholesale oil distributor. So I don't believe they get serviced by rail, but in my world they do. But they will be, actually Robinson Oil has the contract with BNSF locally to refuel their locomotives. So while they're sitting on the tie-down track in Garden City, you'll see a Robinson Oil truck pull up to them and hook their hose up to them and fill them with 5,000 gallons of diesel fuel. So that's actually their building sign, and I made some storage tanks for them. Now, this is basically a Kitbash, I believe, of Rick's Products buildings. But there is a company called Fantastic Plastics, and that is their actual logo. And the nice thing that I've discovered on the internet, if you do a Google search for, let's say, plastic companies, you put in Fantastic Plastics, and it will come up with just about everything you ever want to know about Fantastic Plastics. So I put a lot of vents on here, and I've got handicap parking, I've got notices. Again, I've got a line of employee cars. I've got a bottled water machine, trash dumpsters. And then these are actually paper semi-trailers from Digcom. They work out pretty well. You just have to put a chassis under them. And then I got the tire markings where people have been turning around and backing around. And then again, like a lot of businesses are proud of their business. So you have the landscaping where you have the mowed grass and you have the trees landscaped a little bit better. But now here's a shot where you can see the rails. There is no track piece that goes across. When this comes together and gets clamped, the rails are just kissing each other. And I really haven't had any alignment problems with them at all. And the interesting part is once you get it's dynamically tensioned in a circle. So the last piece that goes in, I actually have to pry the layout apart to get the last piece in there, and then it comes together. So once I have it up, I can literally go take every clamp off the place and it will not come down. It won't shake, it doesn't rattle, it's just stuck together.
Robert, the trailers that you're showing in that, you made those out of paper?
Yes. There's a company called Digcom, and you have to buy them, but like for instance, you buy the XPO logistics trailer, you can make 1,000 of them if you want. You just pay for them one time.
What's the name of it?
Digcom, DIGCOM.com.
Thank
And
you.
they do HO more than they do N scale. So,
Is that the only product that they do in paper?
oh no, they've got a whole bunch of stuff. I think this is pretty much all other than the trash dumpsters. See, those are paper products too. But now the only thing about building a trailer like that, I found it very difficult to keep it square when you're building it. So I actually had to make a sheet styrene jig to kind of bend it around and when you make the final fold so that it stays square and doesn't twist and warp. But once you figure out how to get them built, like USF Holland, that's Digcom. Most of the trailers over on the grain mill were also the paper trailers. Because in N scale, these are probably $20 a piece. Whereas Digcom, I can pay like $5 and print out all I want.
I've done their pop machines. They're pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got a number, and I believe they have a product like if you have a tractor trailer in a larger scale, if you want the back doors open, they have like pallets of goods that you can show that there's stuff in the truck.
Spell it again for me. B-I what?
D as in dog.
D as in dog.
C-O-M.
D-I-G.
D-I-G-C-O-M. As in dig a hole. Digcom.
Okay.
And I can send you the link.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we showed the Walmart building before. This is now the module 14. We're back to the city scene on the other side. And I've got the scratch built O'Reilly Auto Parts, got scratch built Edward D. Jones Investment Broker, scratch built Western State Bank. Now this is just kind of, in Western Kansas, there's a zillion little car dealers. But if you notice on these cars, they do not have license plates, but they have stickers in the window because they're being sold. So this is a grade crossing that I have since completed, but this is where it's under construction. And I just installed the electronic equipment box for the grade signals. I have one over here and one over on this side. And then this is back to module number one of the things that I have been doing, we're quite patriotic, so I've been going around putting American flags on most of the businesses. Here's some of the light poles and the traffic lights. These are all scratch built. Now the street signs that we have on that corner module where it showed the intersection, those are actually digital photographs of the real street signs. And then over here, my tire dealer, this isn't an actual representation of that one, but there was a guy that I knew personally for about 20 years who was a tire dealer, and this is the way he stacked up the tires, the ones that he took in on, when he sold you a new set, these were the old tires, they would stack them up alongside the building like that so that a truck would come and pick them up later. That's it. Any questions?
Very good, Robert.
Thank you.
Jim,
Nice work.
thanks for inviting me. I have another Zoom meeting with my division starting now.
Well, I'm sorry to lose you, but thank you for coming.
Nice to meet you, John.
Same here, guys, and I'll join in again when I can.
That sounds great, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Question with,
so you say you've been working on it for like 6 years. I mean, how many people do you have working with you on it?
Me?
You only? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I let anybody who wants to run on it, but I paid for it all. I built it all. And I think that's one of the things that adds to the uniformity of it. When you have one person doing it, you get the same level of craftsmanship and you get the same ideas flowing. Whereas opposed like with N-Track, you've got 100 different guys with 100 different modules, and some guys are great modelers and some guys are just getting started, and you have this eclectic collection of things.
now with the license plates with the cars, are they all different?
Well, actually in N scale, they're so small you can't actually read them. So I just took mailing labels and cut them into strips and then cut them into length and stuck them on the back of the cars. It's just to give a representation. If you see a car without a license plate, it would be a red flag. So now in HO or a larger scale, you could actually take a photograph of a real license plate and shrink it down. You could still read it. But the problem I have, this was actually kind of interesting to me because I was, those grade crossings where it says railroad crossing, I had bought a set from, I can't remember the name of it, but I bought a set of them and I thought, well, those are going to be more realistic than what I can do. And it turned out that the ones that I printed out were better than theirs. I took a photograph of a real grade crossing sign and shrunk it down. The problem you get into with N scale is you get so tiny, like a license plate of that size, the printer can't print it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the computer, you can see it on your page and you can shrink it down, you can see it on your screen, but when it tries to print, it just comes out black or whatever the color is. So that's what, like, Kansas license plates have a white background. So I was able to get out of it real cheap.
Usually on like printing out any type of data or anything for N scale, once you get anything less than 1 point, you're not going to read it.
Right.
Like
the big signs you see on the highway, those printed out very nice because you're not getting too small.
Right.
They're still about an inch and a half wide. And so they printed out real nice, but like a license plate is so small, you wouldn't, it would just be a blur. You couldn't read it.
Well, and if you wanted to add a little bit to it, you just take a pen and just do a little squiggle on it or something. And that, kind of indicates, something there.
That's true. So any questions?
You have a great layout there. I would love to see it sometime, but I don't know if I'll ever be out that way in Kansas.
Just hop on a plane.
Right. Well,
Or just drive for 3 days. You can get here.
well, when are we gonna get back to train shows? That'll be the thing, you know?
Oh, I would say that's going to happen sometime after November.
I got to
Robert,
admit, though, I'm very impressed. The sense of scale you get with this is excellent.
Well, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about N scale, because the trains themselves are such a diminutive size. You can have larger scenery that can that dwarf the trains. One of the things that I noticed, I was at a train show. Now this would have been 1997 or something, a long time ago. But I was at a train show with our layout, and I'd gone to get something to eat, and I'm walking back down the aisle, and there was a big O-scale club that I'd forgotten by as I walked by it. And I see coming towards me chugging this beautiful O-scale big boy. And I go, oh man, that is just so fantastic. And then it got to the corner, and the trucks are pointing this way, and the boiler was still going off the end of the layout. And I go, you just killed it. So
Robert, can I ask you a question about your module construction?
Yes, sir.
You were indicating it was what you called monocoque.
Huh?
How flexible would that be?
Flexible as in what?
As in, well, flexible as in if you were to take one end of it and twist it. Is there any flex to it, or is it fairly rigid?
It is extremely rigid. It will not flex.
Okay, and that's all 1/4 inch.
Yeah.
Other than the 3/4 that you indicated.
Well, let me see if I can go back to that. There it is. Okay, are you seeing that now?
I'm seeing it now.
Okay, everything in here is 1/4 inch Luan plywood, which is basically floor decking. And what that means is that both sides have a finished quality to them. You don't have that rough, grainy feeling.
Right.
And we'll use stiffeners, which is basically, I think we took 1/2 by 1 and ripped them in half longwise, and then cut them into like 2-inch long blocks. And we just filled up a shoebox of those things. So this is all just Elmer's wood glue and 1/4 inch Luan. And then we put the stiffeners in there. And of course you have to clamp it down. And so to go all the way across, we went to Harbor Freight and bought some really like 3 foot, or I guess a 3.5 foot clamps.
Right.
To clamp them in this way. But one of the things that I was taught on doing this was water is quite heavy. So we took milk jugs. I got a bunch of quart milk jugs and gallon milk jugs and just filled them with water. And so when you needed to press down from the top, you can just set these jugs on there and that'll hold it quite nicely. But now the interesting thing, the problem that I had was I built the corners first, and we had up at our club building a little 3 foot by 3 foot, I guess it was like an end table, and it looks flat to me. So I was using that as my construction jig, and I literally clamped everything to the top of that table. Well, then when I was finished and I turned it upside down, I could see that it was downsloped to the rounded outside corner. And what the hell? Well, I took a straight edge and put it on that table. That table wasn't flat. I had warped my module to the shape of that table. And I was going to say, well, scratch that one, start all over. And then I thought, actually, module number 6 is that first module that downslopes, and that's where I put in my dry riverbed, so that it actually slopes down towards you.
Are you saying, Robert, that that you only use glue on this?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no nails, screws,
No.
etc.
Yep. Just Elmer's wood glue.
And this has lasted 6 years?
Oh yeah. It's been to several train shows. Yeah.
Because I do a lot of module work with an HO train club, and I'm looking for lightweight because I'm getting older and I hate lifting these confounded.
That's exactly why we built this. Yeah.
I'm impressed.
So the difference with this is about, now from here down to here would be a standard 2 by 4 foot end track module. So mine's an extra 6 inches wide and an extra 2 feet on the ends. And if you forget about the legs, just the module itself, this is lighter than the 2 by 4 module.
Could you literally pick this thing up?
Where the weight comes in is those steel banquet table legs. Those sons of bitches are heavy.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
Did you notch the cross pieces, or they just didn't? You got one long string?
No, they're just actually the long pieces. There's 4 long pieces, and so basically you turn your skin upside down, and the first pieces you put on are your 2 end plates, and you have to be very careful to make sure they're a true 90 degrees, and you let them dry. Then you put the outer 2 pieces on. Now, again, this is where you can speed it up if you have an air stapler, because like on this end over here, the outer piece goes over the piece. So instead of having to clamp that, you can just go pop, 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 and that joint's finished. And
right.
So then you're just putting in these cross pieces are the only individual pieces. So this piece and this piece are the same size. This is the only different size. So you cut them into strips, and then you just cut them into the lengths you want. And you notice that on every piece on mine, I drilled a hole, I think 1/2 inch diameter hole for electrical wiring. Now, the only thing that I did beyond that, I decided that when it was time to do the wiring, I was able to turn the module on its side and clamp it to a table upwards. And I felt that a 1/4 inch plywood was a little too thin to be, because I had the bands that hold the wires, and I wanted a little longer screw than that. So I cut little rectangular pieces of 1/4 inch. So you now have a 1/2 inch. And I used that as a mounting plate to mount my wire holders.
Robert, I don't see anything that's quite showing the scale. Would that be 4 inches deep or 6 inches deep?
From where to where?
Like on the depth of it, like
it's 4 inches. 4 inches deep.
4 inches. Okay.
And then this is not showing the bottom skin. You have a top skin. This is showing everything done except for the bottom skin. And you basically cut another piece just like the top skin, but what we did is we cut out rectangular holes in the center of each of these boxes, and then that allows you to glue it to the ribs. So you're actually a sandwich. That's the part that you're missing for the structural strength.
Oh, okay, so you're making a box out of this thing.
Correct. There is a bottom piece that goes on, bottom skin that goes on that.
Okay, and it's glued on too.
It is glued on. Yeah, that one you just you put your glue down, set it in place, and put your milk bottles on it, and or you can clamp it however you wanted to do it.
So, as a rough estimate, how much would one of these boxes weigh? 20, 30 pounds?
You mean a module like this?
Yeah, a module like that.
15.
15?
Yeah. You're talking 1/4 inch Luan plywood.
I'm impressed.
Now, the weight comes from the steel banquet table legs.
Yeah.
So if you can get away from that, then you'd have an even lighter module. But this allows you to have a large size module. And this worked out quite well for me, because having the ambulance to transport it, I've got an older style box on the ambulance. The newer ones are 6 foot tall interior, but they're only 10 foot long. And mine is only 5 foot, so I have to stoop over when I'm inside, but it's a 12 foot long box. So I can get 2 of these end to end in there, and it works out quite well.
Now, your track work on top of this is then laid with 3/4 inch?
Correct.
Okay.
So what I did was, I don't really have a good picture of it. Well, this would probably be the closest one.
Yeah.
Imagine this brown foam is not here.
Right.
This is the 3/4 inch. We took the 3/4 inch plywood and cut it with an angle so that the top of the angle would be about the width of HO scale cork.
Right.
Then the N scale cork went on top of that. And if I
Okay.
had done my ballast a little bit better, you would have had that double profile.
Right. So all your track work is then running on fairly solid, well, quite solid wood.
Yeah, the only differences are some of the sidings, the industry sidings, and the yard. But the yard is a flat piece of foam, so it's all glued and screwed down, so it doesn't shift either.
Right. Right.
Now let me go to here. You can see what I did here was the problem with the foam glue is that the stuff that's in the center never really dries because there's no air contact to it.
Right.
So what I did was I applied the glue, set it in place, and then I just used countersink drywall screws to screw this down to the wood, and then came back with spackling and filled over the holes.
Yeah.
What I've found for using on the foam, what works better than the foam glue actually is they have a glue for that vinyl base material that you see in industrial places, and that works much better than the foam glue. It dries, it holds better. Still use a couple drywall screws to kind of hold place.
Oh, now I didn't realize this until just now, but if you look over here to the right, here is the strip of 3/4 inch wood.
Oh.
There's your 3/4 inch wood with the cork on top with the track on top of it.
Right.
And then the foam is just filling in. It raises the scenery back up to the level of the track. Otherwise, the ground would be 20 feet below the track.
Right.
Scale size.
It's very
When do
interesting.
you put the wiring in, Robert?
I get all of the track put down and soldered in place. And usually I kind of hook up the temporary system and just run some locomotives and cars over to make sure the track work is okay. And all the while I put the track, once I finish a section, then I go in and put the power drops down. And then I went through, it was probably about 3 months worth of work where I would turn each module on its side and run the main bus lines under it. And then you have to strip the insulation and hook up the wires and get the main bus connected.
Do you do that with the bottom piece on the box?
Yes. Yeah,
So
that's why you're cutting holes.
Okay.
So each one of those boxes is accessible from underneath. You're
Okay.
really you would draw, let's say, when you go back to this picture here, where you would draw on your skin the center line of where your ribs are,
Right.
and you go 1 inch on either side. So you go 1 inch on all the sides here, and then you cut out the center. That's the hardest part of it. It was
Okay, so
yes, cutting out all those holes.
So this is a fairly open piece then, really.
From underneath, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not really going to fill in. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So when you have the bottom ribs on here, or the bottom skin on this, that's just for structural strength. That just helps it to keep it from warping and twisting.
Right.
But you've got, like here, you've got a big hole. So you can put, now, of course, you got holes on all of these. So you have the ability to clamp from 2 modules together, and your electrical wiring can be gotten to and fixed if necessary.
Do you paint the interior and the exterior, or just the exterior?
One of the things I've learned the hard way is whenever you work with wood, you paint it all.
Yeah.
Top and bottom, inside and out. So basically I painted flat black on all the exterior surfaces. I didn't really paint the top because I was going to be gluing to it, but all the sides are flat black. And then on inside, I painted it white so that you can see the wiring better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is the way it looks from the outside. Now you can see this corner here. This is the one I was talking about where it actually dips down on the outside edge.
Wow. A lot.
So it worked, a mistake worked out.
So the bottom looks more like a cheese grater?
Oh, I wish I had a picture of that. I mean, I wish I had it accessible. it's, well, like, I guess the best thing I can do is, if you were gonna make this, you would, now, we just used standard measurements. We knew, and I don't remember the exact measurements, but let's say that was 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 foot. You would take your bottom skin and you would make the lines where your ribs were gonna be, and then you just move in 1 inch and parallel them. And then
Right.
we took a bottle cap to round the corners. So you basically then drill a hole and then use your saber saw to go in and cut the rest of it out.
Robert, on your long stringers, if just I'm asking for an opinion, I guess, at this point. If you had the box 6 inches deep, which is what we do in HO, would it then make sense to drill holes in the center of the stringers to lighten it up, much the way they would do a girder?
You could, but you got to remember that 1/4 inch Luan plywood only has a limited strength.
Right.
If you like, if I went in here, I've got 1 hole drilled on each one of these sections.
Right.
If I went in there and drilled a whole bunch of holes and made it look like Swiss cheese, you're going to greatly reduce your structural strength.
Some of the guys that I've seen do this have actually taken, like, where you would have 1 box there, they would take 1 hole dead center. You have to have it dead center, and they would do maybe 2 holes. Okay, so that basically you're almost making like a girder. It should maintain the same strength, and I'm just wondering if that would be a way to lighten it.
Well,
even further.
For the actual construction details, you can do a Google search on the Sippin and Switchin Society of North Carolina. They have a web page that describes everything they do.
Sippin and Switchin.
But you know, the funny part of all this is when this fine gentleman moved to Dodge City and was explaining all this to us, I'm going, that'll never work. No, that's not going to work. It'll never work in N scale. But the more I worked with them and the more that I saw the possibilities, I said, you know, I could just make some small changes and it would work.
Yeah. That's got me really thinking.
But if you need something light and strong and rigid, see, like, we don't have to laser level this, because once you get them clamped together, they're rigid enough. If there's a dip in the floor, they'll just go right over it.
Right.
Now, I also carry a little pail of 1/4 inch Luan, probably 2 inch by 2 inch squares, that if I've got a really big dip, I can start putting wood pieces under it.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's so well aligned, the biggest problem with N-Track and why we had to laser level it is that if you had a dip or you had a raise, then your track piece would not fit properly. It was either too tight or you had 1/4 inch gaps.
Yeah.
So we had to laser level everything, get it absolutely level, and then the track pieces would fit in there properly. But I had a whale of a time. I took my old N-Track layout down at the Oklahoma City show, and the bad thing I did was we had the Dodge City show 2 weeks before that in the wintertime. This is like November, December. And I decided, for being lazy, that I would just leave the layout in the truck, which was parked outside, for 2 weeks before I went to the show. So everything got cold soaked in like below freezing temperatures for 2 weeks. And when I got to Oklahoma City, none of my track pieces fit. The rails had contracted so much, I had like 1/4 inch gaps. And I had to run around and buy Flex Track and try to cut all these new pieces out. But I took the N-Track layout to Oklahoma City by myself in 2013. And I got in the building at 1:30 in the afternoon. I worked until they kicked us out at 9 o'clock, and I still wasn't done setting up. I didn't get really set up until like noon on Saturday when the train show was already open. So with this system, I can be up and ready to run trains, and I could be running trains in about an hour and, let's say, an hour and a half, and I can have all the buildings on in a couple hours.
Wow.
How do you adjust the floors?
Well, the modules are so rigid, I don't have to adjust. So if there's a major gap, I've got those little pieces of Luan plywood that I can stick under the legs.
How many legs per module? Two or
Two.
four?
Two.
Two.
Yeah, just two on each end. And,
And
I,
then
and I take my comment back. They are offset about 2 inches because with the extenders on them, they overlap just a little bit.
okay.
But we'll mount, the legs are mounted back here and back there, and then they just fold up in the center.
I know one of the module clubs we have up here in Indiana, rather than the fold up legs, they just put blocks in the corner,
Right.
and they used PVC pipe, and they just hold, one guy holds it up, they slide the legs in, and it's really rigid. And they've made some type of a jig, not a jig, but when they open up the legs, there's cross pieces in it as well with PVC pipe. And it really works out pretty good. So they don't have any legs or anything to mess with, folding up or anything like that, and which makes the modules lighter then as well.
Yeah, that is the advantage of having separate legs, that the modules are lighter, but then you have to have the cargo space to carry the legs separate, and then you have to take the time of putting them on.
Right.
So in this particular instance, one of the reasons why I built this layout is with my old N-track layout, we built that over maybe 10 years and tried several different kinds of legs. So I had 26 pieces of module which had 5 different kinds of legs. It was a pain in the ass.
Right. Yeah, I mean, every club's kind of got their own way of legs and everything.
Yeah, we used the 2x2, legs you just stick in the pocket. So I'm carrying this big old armful of legs. So it was just kind of one of those things that I said, nah, the steel legs are much heavier, but you just go fold, fold, and you stick it up on its feet.
Right. You've definitely done a nice job on it and a nice layout for sure. And a lot of guys, of course, you're doing more modern. I guess if you wanted to go back, to 60s or 70s, you'd have to figure out what buildings were in that area for that time frame, I suppose.
Right.
But so many people put in buildings like everybody makes the same building, and take it out of the box and it's Joe's Biscuits, like you said. And
Well,
they don't
was
change
it George Roberts Printing and
right? They don't change the
all
name.
the Walther's kits.
Yeah. I mean, I build a building and I very rarely leave it the same as what's in the box, It's like.
Now, let me go to there it is. Like on this building, this is all PVC construction and sheet styrene, but this is actually 4 of the Walther's, the gold medal flower buildings. So I was able to take 4 kits and combine them.
Robert, let me ask you a question. When
Sure.
you're scratch building one of these structures and so forth, how do you know when it's finished?
They're never finished. Let me see if I can find, okay, here's the grain elevator. Like this is the grain elevator, the way it sits today, but I have done none of the detail work on it. There are dust collectors along the sides. There's wiring that's hung along the sides. There's all different kinds of metal legs and different bins, and there's a truck scale that I just haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. But when people, like for instance, it was amazing when I went to both Denver and Colorado Springs with it, that of course, again, people model what they see. So when you're in Denver and Colorado Springs, they're there in the Rockies, and every layout had mountains of one kind or another. Some were old time narrow gauge and some were modern, but mine was the only one that didn't have mountains. And everybody would come crowd around my layout because it was different. And they had some really good layouts over there too.
you do any weathering on your buildings, or you just kind of leave like
Oh,
this?
yeah.
This looks pretty white, like it was just painted yesterday.
Well, yeah, again, I haven't really started on the detailing of that.
Right, yeah.
But like on this building here, you can see the difference in the shades
Yeah,
on the
see,
building
yeah.
and the rust on the roof. But again, you got the license plates on the cars, you got the guttering. Now, one of the things that I always try to do, I did have an advantage in that I was acted as a general contractor for 10 years. And so you got to remember every structure is going to have a foundation or a basement. So you have to represent that. You're going to have water, sewer, gas, electric. So, you know, whether it's a power pole and hanging the electric. Now, in Western Kansas, it's a little bit easier because a lot of times now they want to trench and drop the electric rather than have it coming in from overhead. But the more you can represent the things that would be in a real building, like you're going to have sidewalk, you're going to have handicap spots, just anything that adds more realism to it.
Well, yeah, I noticed, you know, a lot of layouts traveling around. So many buildings, they just kind of take and plop it on the railroad, and you know, there's no foundation around it, or it's setting on uneven scenery, you know, and
Right.
it just doesn't look finished, you know.
Now, if you had experience in construction, I did see, and it was on the internet somewhere, may have been Facebook, but they had they had a small little odd shaped piece of their layout. They didn't know what to do with it. So they started a subdivision. So they had like 3 or 4 houses that were under construction. So like one was just an empty basement, and one had the floor, and one had some of the walls up, and one was nearly finished. And you could see the different things that were going on with the construction.
That's what really adds to the scenery, you know, and makes everything different. Like you say, it's like real life kind of, you know.
Well,
We
one of the
have
things that I've
a
always tried to
building.
do is go find pictures of the real thing. Let me see if I can find, where did I see that picture? Well, that's Walmart. Where did I see that? Oh, there it is. Now see, like O'Reilly's Auto Parts, that was a building in Garden City, Kansas. And one of the things that I found is business owners or managers are usually very proud of their business. So I went in and I asked for the manager, and he came out, and of course he probably thought I had a complaint or something. And I told him who I was and why I was there, and would it be okay if I actually, you know, took measurements and took photographs? He said, sure, go ahead. do whatever you want to do. So I actually went around the building with my tape measure, and I took measurements. And one of the things that I've seen other people do, and I may have to try to do this, is like take different sizes of PVC pipe and make them telescope, where you print like 1 foot segments of black and white. So you can set it up against the side of the building and give you an idea of the space. Now, one thing that you can generally know for sure is that like a front door is usually 7 foot tall. So if you have a business, and this is some of the things that I did in scratch building, you can if you have a front door, you know that door is 7 foot tall, so you can almost make a ruler out of that, you know, take a piece of paper and mark that that's 7 foot, and you can kind of figure, okay, now we're at 15 foot or 20 foot or whatever it happens to be. But I go to the business, I take lots of pictures from different angles, and like you can't see it from this picture, but in O'Reilly Auto Parts, I actually went inside the door and took a photograph of the interior of the building, and then I printed that out where it would be roughly scale, and I glued that to a piece of sheet styrene that I then mounted about 1 inch behind the front windows. So when you look down in there, you can see the overhead lights, and you can see, it looks like there's something in the building.
Have you gone back and showed the guy after you got the model finished?
I thought about that in a couple of instances, but I haven't actually done that. One of the things that I really ought to do is, if I were going to do a project like this again, I would actually build 2 of them simultaneously so that I could take one of them back to the grain elevator and say, this is yours. You can do with it as you wish. Because a lot of them will put it in trophy cases or, you know, put them in their office, or it'll be something that they would really appreciate.
So like this grain elevator, I mean, you built the height, but did you make it the real length that it actually is?
Yes, that's the actual length.
Okay.
And well, I didn't really measure the length per se, but I measured the number of silos.
Okay.
So this section is 7 silos, this is 11, and this is 19.
Because I know in some cases, I mean, to make stuff fit, you kind of got to shrink it down a little bit because, you know, you don't have, if a building's 500 foot long, you obviously don't have that in scale and you don't take up half your layout. So you have to kind of shrink things down a little bit.
Now there's 2 technical errors on this model. One is this head house area here should actually be flipped around the other direction. And then when I decided to take it down to the layout and test fit it before I finished it. And I realized that I have tracks back here.
Oh.
So I go, okay, I'll just flip it around. And so this is technically should be flipped the other way. But between the silos, this is a common construction in Western Kansas where you actually have 2 diameters with without a common wall. And so they have the little strip of concrete between them. And that's relatively easy to do with PVC pipe. The actual Dodge City elevator construction, they're using in between the silos is a common wall. So it's almost like what I would have to do to model that would I have to take each one of these pieces to a machine shop and have them machine flat both sides of it so that they would compress together. I said, I'm not paying for a machine shop. Because you'd have to be exactly opposite one another. If you're off just a degree or 2, it wouldn't work.
Right.
So it would take an extreme degree of precision. And I said, I'll just build it that way.
What was the hardest part of building your module?
Of the layout or the module or what?
The layout.
Probably the money. My biggest fear in life is when I die, my wife will sell my trains for what I told her I paid for them. But, I don't know. Probably the track work, I would imagine. Microengineering is not real easy to work with, at least in N scale. The Atlas Flex track was loosey-goosey. So if you wanted an S curve, you could just kind of move it and it was like a Gumby. It would just move. The microengineering was a rigid flex track. So you had to bend it. And once it was bent, it was that way. And so you had to be very precise in your bending and getting it to get it where it wanted to go. And the hardest thing I think was the rail joiners. They used very small, very tight fitting rail joiners. They were so tight I couldn't get them on. I literally had to build a device that would open them up so that I could get them pushed onto the track without stabbing the end of my thumb like a zillion times. But once it's down, and it is performed magnificently well. I think there was only one piece of track where the gauge had narrowed. I don't know what, it must have been a manufacturing flaw, but it was easy to cut out and fix. That's where before I do the ballast and the scenery, I got all, let's see, where's that picture? Well, okay, oh, here, I can just use this. This is where I had all the foam insert pieces done and all the track is laid, all the wiring is in, and I just ran trains for about a month to see where they were derailing, what was causing problems, is there a switch causing a problem, if I got dead spots somewhere. And because once you put the ballast down, it's a lot harder to fix. You then have to repair the ballast also. But one of the nice things about using this foam method, I wish I could zoom this in a little bit, but with the foam, I found it very easy to shape using a detail sander. My wife had bought they had the little palm-sized detail sanders with the pointy end. And I found that if you use like a really aggressive grit, like 80 grit paper, just the tiniest touch and it goes, yeah, you know, you could carve a river real quick, and yeah, it would just go right through it. So here I've got a little plateau on the edge, and I feathered it down, but I've also put in water drain where water has eroded the soil and taken it out. The other thing that I did, you can see along the side here and the outer sides, I wanted a safety guardrail to keep trains from hitting the floor, but I didn't want it to look like a guardrail. So this isn't necessarily terribly realistic, but it looks okay. It fits.
What's the mistake that you would correct if you were doing this again?
That's a tough question. I don't really know if I'm not really unhappy with any aspect of it, other than the steel legs. If I could find a plastic variant of the steel legs that would be strong enough. The modules are a little heavier than I want them to be, but I think for overall, I'm pretty satisfied with it.
Gotcha.
If you go up to where it says view, you can actually make that picture a little bit bigger. Zoom in on it.
Oh, view?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then pick a like zoom in.
Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then just pick a bigger number than what you have, if it'll let you.
Well, it's
Yeah, it might not let you zoom in more than what you have.
it's not letting me do it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I was able to do with this foam was, in Western Kansas, there's a lot of gullies because of the relatively sandy soil and the rains that have come. And so what I was able to do is I went to Google Earth and I found a interesting looking gully, and I was able to scale it to print it on the size that I wanted it on the layout. So then what I did was I took that picture and I cut out the very bottom of the gully, and I traced that on the foam and literally cut that out. And then I went back to the picture and cut out where the top of the gully was along the ridge line. And then I traced that on there. And then I was able to use that with the sander to slope it down the way it would really have been in the gully. And it worked out. It's much better than I could have just out of my imagination tried to make it do it.
Unbelievable.
So any other questions?
In N scale, how thick is the foam that you have on there?
3/4 inch.
3/4
I
inch?
used a 3/4 inch foam because I'm using 3/4 inch plywood under the track.
Right, okay.
I'm basically just raising the scenery up to the level of the track.
So
But
what would 3/4 inch give you in N scale? What depth would that give you? 10 feet?
Scale, that would probably be like 8 foot
8 foot?
in scale size. Now you can see with the foam, it was very easy to cut my drainage ditches before I ever put the foam in.
Right.
So I was able to make, like for instance here, I made a template of this triangular piece, transferred it to the foam, cut it out, and then I was able to shape my drainage ditches before I ever put it down.
Right.
That's one thing I've noticed on a lot of layouts, and I think it's because they usually start with a plywood sheet and go up. You very rarely see drainage ditches and water control features, but they're quite common out here. Because we don't get a lot of rain, but when we get it, they're gully washers. I think we had a bad thunderstorm the other night. We got something like 3 inches of rain in 2 hours.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yow.
But see, then we may not get rain until November. So it's hit or miss. But it is kind of interesting living out here in Western Kansas because it's not flat the way everybody thinks it is. There's a lot of hills and gullies and whatnot. And the lot that I bought to build my house is 4 acres. And it was all natural field grass when I first got it. That field grass is almost 3 foot tall. So think back to Gunsmoke and these movies of the pioneers crossing the prairies. You never see them walking through grass. You know, it's all flat and it's, you know, it's like they're on a road. And it's like the women would be hiking their skirts up to their knees because you're literally having to march through this stuff. And it was the interesting story was when I first tried to mow this stuff down, I went to Sears and bought a yard tractor, which is a good size, but it's really not adequate for 4 acres. But the neighbor across the way, theirs was already mowed down. So I'm out there mowing and I'm having to go the highest engine speed and the slowest ground speed. And it was chewing it up and spitting it out. But I mean, I'm going very slow because this stuff is taller than the hood of the tractor. And I'm mowing it down and spitting it out. Well, she comes out in her Zetor and she's done it in an hour. Well, in an hour, I've made 2 laps. So she goes into her husband and says, you got to go help him. So he came over the next week, said, I'm a farmer. I got a John Deere with a batwing mower. I can have this done in a half hour. I said, go for it. So he went out there and he knocked it down to about 8 inches for me. And then I've got to keep it mowed down. But I think it takes me about 3 days, about 2 hours a day to get all this mowed. So if anybody wants to build a garden railway, they can come out.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right?
Well, it's kind of one of those things. I've toyed with the idea of a garden railroad, but number one, I despise yard work. And number two, that would just increase the yard work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've got prairie dogs out here. And, you know, actually, I'm about 2 miles north of Dodge City. And surprisingly, I'm in the country. I'm not in the city anymore, guys. And so there are coyotes out here, and there are all kinds. I've seen many snakes. We have a lot of bull snakes out here. And I built a metal building to house this layout, and I had mice in it. So I've had an exterminator out here. I think we got the mice out.
Well, Robert, I can't thank you enough for tonight. I think that this is just absolutely magnificent. Your work is just really spectacular, and I think you've certainly come up with a lot of ideas for a lot of modelers that can benefit from your knowledge.
Well, one quick point is I've noticed a lot of people when they do, and this is usually on Facebook, you know, where you see all different kinds of modeling skills. But I don't know how many times I've seen people where they have streets intersecting and they have square corners and there's no sidewalks. And it's like, you know, having been a general contractor, there are things, you know, you're going to round your corners and you have to have sidewalks and you got to have different crossing walks where people can walk. Now, the one thing you do not see on this layout are people. I haven't gotten to that level yet. But unfortunately, in N scale, you can buy a zillion people from China for not too much money. But Chinese must have a real weird opinion of Americans because I've never seen anybody wear a yellow shirt and pink pants. So you would literally have to repaint every single person that you put down on the layout. They have garish colors, and I don't know why, but
Well, usually there's 4 different colors they use for the whole batch.
yeah, that's probably true. But that's where, you know, I try to take either Google Earth or just go around with my camera and take lots of detailed pictures and try to remember you're going to have sidewalks, you're going to have curbing, you're going to have guttering, you're going to, you know, all these little details that when you look at a city scene that it seems to come to life. It looks like, and I've had a number of people ask me, is that a real street in Garden City? And I said, no, it's just a generic street, but Garden City does have a 4-lane highway through it just like that. So I've bored you all to tears. Come on, guys. Wake up. Wake up.
Not at all. I thoroughly
Oh,
enjoyed
he's already,
it.
he's asleep down here.
Really fascinating.
I think it's great.
Very nice.
And and something different too, because you presented something that at least I don't hear about that much. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and wanting to do this, Robert. I really do appreciate it.
Well, one other thing that I've tried to do, you notice on my propane cars here, I really started to paint the wheels. I like metal wheels now instead of the plastic. And I paint them rust color and paint the side frames rust color. And when you look at the shiny part of the wheel versus the rusty part of the wheel, it looks a lot more realistic.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done. You can turn me off now. See, I used to be a radio DJ. You get me started and I won't stop.
There you go. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for coming tonight. Next time, Doug Coster is going to talk to us about his modeling, his techniques. And again, this is going to be something a little different. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And having somebody here talking about in scale, you know, while I write for different 2 magazines, you know, I like to write about in scale and HO and G scale and all the different scales, because the modeling talent and the skill level involved doesn't really change. I don't care what scale you're in. The same kind of theory, the same kind of creativity, the same modeling skills apply to every one of those scales. And that's why, to me, that's why Robert was important tonight. That's why Doug's going to be important for us to see the next thing. And I hope that you all agree with that philosophy and or enjoy maybe hearing and seeing a different modeling than maybe you do all the time. So with that said, I hope you learned something tonight. I hope it's been worth your time to be with us. And I hope you'll come back. And like I say, tell your friend, the more the merrier.